Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this 12th day of May, and a very wet day, I must say, right here in Brisbane at this point in time. Very dull and gloomy outside and wet and cold. So that's what Brisbane is, but the temperature is 20 degrees. So yes, it's still not too bad temperature-wise, but yes, it is raining and gloomy outside. But anyway, we have lots to get through today. So in the first part of the show today, we'll have all the daily news updates, looking at the election and the election campaign, and then we will go into our daily India report. And then at 9:30, we will join the Queensland Parliament sitting live coverage. And at 10 a.m., we'll have a very special interview today from Breeze Raga Group. And that's a wonderful the event that's taking place. Find out more by tuning in and at 10 for that interview. Well, right now, let's get the show on the road with the first. So, Albanese wins final leaders debate. That's what the people's verdict is. Let's take a look.
For tonight's debate, Seven's Mark Riley said that he would have a chair and a whip on standby. Thankfully, he did not need the latter. Tonight was a much less dramatic affair, much more controlled format by Seven West Media. Less drama, I guess, than the 9 format on Sunday night. But this one helped elicit, I suppose, some more answers. Both leaders seem pretty confident and assured tonight. I think both would be happy with their performances. We're always talking about these debates in the context of, did anybody land a knockout blow or did anybody stuff up really badly? Well, neither really tonight. So you'd think that both would be happy with their performances. And I guess what we saw tonight was kind of an encapsulation of this campaign so far. We have Scott Morrison campaigning on his record, on the economy, on national security, on the government's handling of the pandemic. He's sharp on the details, but he sort of falls down on the question of vision for the future. He's effectively offering more of the same. That is where Anthony Albanese is perhaps stronger than Scott Morrison. He has deliberately made himself a small target. He's not offering, big, bold reforms. What he's offering to the Australian public is, in his words, a renewal, not revolution. So the key questions tonight really, again, were on wages, cost of living, the defining issues of this campaign, as well as the rise of this so-called teal independence and character, the two men vying to become Prime Minister after May 21. Well, let's get into the details now, and we've got our ABC reporters Matthew Doran and Stephanie Boris who are covering the two leaders' campaigns, and we're watching tonight's debate very closely in Sydney. Welcome to you both, and I guess I just want to start off with your reflections on this third and probably final debate of the election campaign.
Good evening, Jane. Well, tonight's debate didn't really move the conversation up on that much. They were talking about their main policies. We heard both of them talking about Medicare, about the hospital systems, a little bit about schooling, but one of the key differences we saw in their policies was that around childcare. The opposition is really pushing forward with a much more expanded childcare policy, whereas the federal government is not. Mr Morrison just saying, look, that's too expensive. That's not something that any government can afford at the moment, and putting questions around that. One sticking point for Mr Morrison, though, is still the Integrity Commission and whether that will be established or not. He's standing his ground, saying that, the one that the government has put forward is the one that should be introduced, but as we've heard time and time again, that has been debated by a number of people and whether it's even the appropriate one to put forward. I'd like to bring Matthew Doran in now as well and get your takes on the third debate, which is expected to be the final one as well.
Yeah, the final debate, as you mentioned, Jane, no real knockout blows, but also no real blunders here. What I think we need to be looking at this debate for is a bit of a hint as to how the last week and a half of the campaign will be going. We've got, from tomorrow, we are in single-digit countdown territory before the polling day on the 21st of May. This will be the opportunity for the leaders to fine-tune some of that rhetoric, fine-tune those attacks on each other. Yes, they are familiar, but also also getting a sense of what is really resonating with the public and the voters that they are trying to win over. As Steffi mentioned, one of the biggest issues this campaign has repeatedly been childcare. That was, again, picked up on by the moderators, picked up on by and questioned, put to the Prime Minister and the opposition leader. But another thing that is really a feature of this campaign, again, the threat that is being posed by Teal independents, how the gentlemen there would be relating to that and what they would think about it for the Parliament in just a couple of weeks' time after that election.
Yeah, and also, I guess, Matt, why the rise of the Teal independents has been another characteristic of this campaign, and we'll get to that in a moment. But I just wanted to start with wages. Gosh, I mean, it's been the big issue since day one of this campaign, but it's certainly heightened in previous days because Anthony Albanese, the Labor leader, has said that he would absolutely back a 5.1% increase to the minimum wage to keep pace with inflation. Well, let's take you back to the debate, to one of the moments where he and Mr Morrison were debating this very issue.
Yesterday you were asked, would you support 5.1%, which is at the moment the rate of inflation? And you said absolutely.
That's right, and if the Fair Work Commission makes that decision, we would absolutely welcome it. What the Reserve Bank says, and what economists say, is that in order to have non-inflationary wage increases, they shouldn't be more than inflation plus productivity.
Underlying inflation.
Inflation plus productivity.
Not headline inflation, not 5.1, 3.5.
And what we're talking about here, is people on minimum wages. It's $20.33 an hour. What we're talking about here, if the Fair Work Commission grant a 5% increase, that's 2 cups of coffee a day. And the idea that 2 cups of coffee a day is something that would damage the economy is, I believe, just not the case.
Yep.
We need to look after people who are vulnerable. We need to do more than say, thanks very much for everything you did in the pandemic, but now we're going to cut your wages.
Very quickly.
Well, if Mr Albanese thinks small businesses around the country can have a 5% increase in their wages bill on top of all the other things they're facing and see their ability to come through, then people won't be worrying about what their wages are. They'll be worrying about whether they have a job. You know, you just can't be loose with the economy with things like this. You've got to be understanding all the moving parts, and there are more moving parts in our economy than ever before with the pressures on global pressures for rising interest rates and inflation. And a 5.1% increase, which the Leader of the Opposition has advocated. He might be trying to walk it back now. That would push up inflation and it would push up interest rates.
Yeah, so this issue of the minimum wage rise, the Fair Work Commission is, of course, considering.
And of course, I think as the Prime Minister mentioned that, you know, would you rather have a pay rise or you would rather have a job? As many small businesses would probably just have to close because they wouldn't be able to, sustain that kind of growth. So, as he mentioned, that you can't be just loose with this kind of calculations. So that let's take a further look at the debate, how it equates out there in the public.
We are only asking that wages be protected from inflation.
But the crowd set off down Russell Street with banners flying.
Union claims are unsustainable.
Those in favour, please.
Teachers today held their second stop work meeting within a week.
From the 1980s.
After a great deal of what the Treasurer calls argy-bargy with the unions, the government finally put its wage case this morning.
When you finish.
To 2022, where the political rhetoric about wage increases has heated up with echoes of the days of old.
Order! $1 extra. That is what this debate is about.
Anthony Albanese is a loose unit on the economy.
The Prime Minister says you're a loose unit.
Well, this Prime Minister is loose with the truth.
He just runs off at the mouth. I mean, it's like he just unzips his head and he just lets everything fall on the table.
We have finally come to a point in the election campaign where there is a genuine point of disagreement between the major parties. The subject is wages, and both sides are taking significant risks. After doing all in its power to minimise the points of difference with the government on budget policy and economic management, Labor has broken cover on its most traditional issue, the wages of the low paid.
Hello!
The opposition leader is asserting the case for a significant pay rise for those on the minimum wage, which would eventually flow through the award system into millions of workers' pay packets. Anthony Albanese is gambling that whatever the scare campaign about the impact of a wage rise on the economy, enough voters will be feeling the constraints of a world in which their pay has not increased for years, compounded by rising inflation, to take a risk. But they will not be the only ones taking a risk.
Are you comfortable with some of Australia's lowest paid workers essentially getting a real wage cut?
What I'm saying is you need to balance all of these things very carefully. That's what responsible economic management is.
Scott Morrison is betting that he can persuade a cautious electorate of the risks to the economy of such a wage rise, a talisman for what he has been darkly warning about Albanese since the beginning of the campaign, and that this will outweigh voters' strained household budgets, even in an election which is primarily about the cost of living.
There is a reason why, Anthony Albanese was never given a financial portfolio by... I haven't finished. Hasn't been given a financial portfolio by any of the Labor leaders in the past. It's because they knew he couldn't be trusted with money.
When I was asked, would I welcome wages for minimum wages keeping up with the cost of living, I answered yes, because I would. We're talking about cleaners. We're talking about retail workers. It is not enough to say, thank you for what you did getting us through the pandemic, and then say, we want to cut your real wage. That is what Scott Morrison is saying.
So what is the argument technically all about? Wages, including minimum wages, are not set by the federal government. The minimum wage is set by the Independent Fair Work Commission. It is currently considering how that rate should be adjusted. It considers arguments from employers and unions. In recent years, governments have provided information to the Commission to help in its deliberations, but has not argued for a specific increase. Innes Willocks is the Chief Executive of AI Group, one of the major employer representatives.
It isn't a command and control economy that we have operating in Australia. Everyone's entitled to their view and their perspective, but in the end it's an independent commission that makes this judgment.
On the other side of the debate, the ACTU has just upped its claim before the Fair Work Commission for the minimum wage to be lifted by 5.5%. That's up from its original claim of 5%. In the wake of news, annual inflation is now running at 5.1%. Labor isn't backing the 5.5% claim. It has backed a rise equal to inflation, but it hasn't actually said it would argue this in a formal submission to the Fair Work Commission if it won government. Labor's IR spokesman, Tony Burke, says that is a stark contrast with the government's position.
They are actively trying to keep wages low at a time that inflation is going up. Now, Anthony's made clear the simple principle: people should not continue to go backwards.
The question is, who is right about the economic impact? What does a non-inflationary pay rise look like?
So something in the order of around 4% would be consistent with inflation within that range. Now, would higher wages growth around 5.1% add to inflation? Not necessarily. It wouldn't necessarily cause an inflation breakout, if you like, but it would embed a higher level of inflation than that RBA range.
For some years now, we have faced the unusual problem of inflation and wages being too low, and that's actually proved a drag on growth, argues economist Angela Jackson.
Real wages falling obviously impacts consumers, it impacts households. It undermines that confidence and that spending in the economy that effectively drives economic growth. So there is a really careful balancing act here.
Labor says it will convene an economic summit to talk to employers and unions about issues like the broken enterprise bargaining system, which could boost productivity. The AI Group also updated its submission yesterday. It now says the minimum wage should be increased by 2.5% instead of 2%. That's a long way short of the ACTU's 5.5%. But Innes Willocks argues that in addition to that increase, the Commission has to take account of a 0.5% super payment plus the value of government payments to households, including the temporary tax cut known as the Low to Middle Income Tax Offset, or Lamington,
which equate to a 1.3% increase in the minimum wage in terms of money going into people's pockets.
AI Group says that means workers would get 4.3% more in the pocket. Labor famously used tax cuts in the 1980s and 1990s to boost household income as a trade-off for workers accepting lower wages. But Tony Burke says things are different now. The Lamington is due to be taken away after the current financial year, when the new minimum wage rate is set. That will be well after the election, but with households still facing higher costs of living.
So there you go. There's that debate in quite a lot of details in those two news clips that we have seen. But right now, if we move on, let's take a look at should health care receive more attention in this campaign, or should we just be stuck with this wages debate?
Frequently, I feel that I have fallen through the cracks. I haven't had the attention that I thought I should.
For 79-year-old Maureen Matheson, it's a daily struggle as she deals with numerous chronic health issues.
Since I turned 70, it has gone down the Swanee. Not good. And it won't improve.
Maureen lives in the town of Moonta in regional South Australia, where GPs have come and gone, making it hard for her to have a regular doctor. Last year, Maureen's chronic back pain flared up and she was forced to travel more than 2 hours to the emergency department in Adelaide.
The only way I was going to get treated was to appear in casualty and say, "Help," which I did, and the doctors were not impressed. However, they did admit me. And I was in for a few days, and they were doing tests. And then my abdomen started to swell. I queried it because nobody else seemed to notice it except me.
Not only did doctors find internal bleeding, but several other serious conditions that hadn't been picked up. Maureen had to remain in hospital away from home for a month.
I do remember saying, "Lord, if you're going to take me, please do it now." However, he declined, and I'm still here.
The hospital system is under pressure from patients with complex conditions. Patient advocate Dorothy Kamika says that people like Maureen wouldn't end up in hospital if they were better cared for in the community.
When patients ring me, they are very often in trouble, and when I think that their symptoms are not being dealt with properly by their doctors, they don't have access to those doctors, then I would tell them to go to an emergency department. And I would think since the beginning of this year, I am probably telling about one client a fortnight to go to the emergency department.
Good on you.
Good to see you.
With less than 2 weeks until polling day, medical groups are underwhelmed by the lack of big ideas on offer.
I think the major political parties are scared about health reform. They think it's expensive, they think it's difficult, and they think it's probably politically unpalatable.
The system is simply jammed up from the back door to the front door, and something has to be done to address this.
We're really looking for more than band-aid solutions. We're really looking for big picture structural reform. You know, over the last decade or so, billions has been taken out of primary care and general practice. And now we're seeing, you know, what they call an acute crisis, but really it's a slow degrading of community-based level of care.
Among the election promises, the Coalition has pledged $146 million to increase the number of doctors in the regions, while Labor has promised $135 million for 50 new urgent care clinics. Both parties have committed to cheaper medicines on the PBS and to expand eligibility for the seniors' health card. While medical groups have welcomed these promises, they say it's not enough to clear the bottlenecks in the hospital system.
The hospital system at the moment is the most dysfunctional I've ever seen it in 20 years of working in it. There's a lot of focus on ambulance ramping and hospital overcrowding at the moment in the media, and it's been presented as if this is a problem with COVID, but actually this problem has been building for years.
So there you go. The problem has been building for years, and it's not just COVID that's added to it. So there's once again, it needs adjustment, and of course in that area as well. So we're looking at the wages, looking at the health care, looking at the rising interest rate, looking at controlling the inflation. So, yeah, incoming government's got quite a few things to look at. Well, right now, before we go to our daily India report, let's go to Ukraine.
So the situation in Azovstal is really dire. I can tell you that to evacuate the civilians from there was an international effort that we were trying to bring up for the last month or so, and it was incredibly complicated, though it was civilians, women, children and elderly. So right now our goal is to evacuate the wounded defenders of Azovstal, and Russians do not want to do that by any means. We are trying to get the United Nations, the Red Cross and other organizations to formulate a mechanism so we can get the people out, but unfortunately right now there is no luck in that. We have talked to our leaders of the defenders there, and they understand that this is a suicide mission. However, they want to continue doing it. They take it as a great result that on May 9th, when Putin was giving his announcement on the Red Square at the parade, he was not any victory. He was not able to say we took Mariupol because they were not able to conquer Azovstal, because our defenders are still there. And this is one of the matters of pride that they are taking, saying he did not get us. So right now our efforts are concentrated on getting the wounded people out of there, and the last piece would be to make sure that all the defenders are in safety.
How hopeful are you of getting them out of there, and how long do you think the mission might take?
So again, we can only assume that compared to how the mission to take the civilians out looked like. So first of all, it was a very dangerous mission for the ones who were performing it, and of course it was incredibly hard to do. So for you to get a feeling of it, it's different levels of agreement that have to be done. The political agreement with Russians, the military agreement with the generals, the organizational part with the international community who are helping out. So people would need to get in and out, and nothing should happen on the way. And before we were able to take the civilians out, it was at least 20 attempts to get those humanitarian corridors out, 20, where something went wrong and the missions were aborted. So right now it's very hard to prognose how much time would take to take the wounded people out, and I can only assure you that we will never stop trying to do that.
No doubt, it's very.
Well, of course, rest assured that they will never stop trying for that, and don't blame them for that, because when lives are at risk, all you can do is try and give it the best sort you can. Well, right now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to go to our daily India report.
Welcome to the daily India report that brings you reports, interviews, features and much more on India and the Indian diaspora. Protesters called for a new government to take control of Sri Lanka. Political compromise could lead to the current Speaker of Parliament becoming a neutral choice for interim Prime Minister, and fresh elections might take place. We have a special report. Protesters in Sri Lanka, which is suffering from its worst economic crisis in history, have called for a new government to take control of the country, while the president urged calm a day after the island nation witnessed its bloodiest clashes that claimed 8 lives and also prompted his brother Mahinda Rajapaksa to quit as the Prime Minister.
Problem is we couldn't find a good leader. So that is the issue going on now. Even the president is asking opposition leader to take over the prime ministership, but he is refusing. So this is the problem going on now. I don't think if a new person comes from outside as a prime minister, then I think we can form a new government and then we can go ahead. It is not at all possible. No one will allow to take over Rajapaksa's family as a prime minister. So we are expecting former speaker Karu Jayasuriya will come as a prime minister. That is the mostly 90% possibilities are there for that. So if he comes as a prime minister from outside for 4 to 6 months, then after that we can go for a new election and then we can form a new government.
Anti-government protests over the shortage of fuel and other essential items have continued across the country for nearly a month. India has so far provided assistance of more than $3.5 billion to Sri Lanka as the country began much delayed talks with the International Monetary Fund for a rescue package and also sought help from China. Sri Lankan authorities issued shoot-on-sight orders on Tuesday to quell unrest that has seen buildings and vehicles set ablaze a day after the island was rocked by deadly violence and rioting. As thousands of security forces a curfew, Defence Ministry said troops have been ordered to shoot on sight anyone looting public property or causing harm to life. The Indian High Commission in Sri Lanka has refuted as fake and blatantly false local social media speculation that former Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa and his family members have fled to India. The Indian rupee recovers to 77.32 a day after a new all-time low of rupees 77.44 to the US dollar. The Indian rupee recovered some of its losses and ended on 10th May at 77.32 against the dollar, a day after falling to its all-time low of 77.44. While the currency gained slightly from its new all-time low hit in the previous session, it was weaker than 77.27 it opened a day before. The Indian rupee appreciated 12 paise to end at 77.32 against the US dollar on May 10th, snapping its two-day losing streak, supported by a rebound in regional currencies and fall in crude oil prices. However, weak domestic equities and persistent foreign fund outflows restricted the gains. In the previous session, the rupee had slumped 54 paise to close at a record low of 77.44 against the US dollar. The recent turmoil was spread across global financial markets with a relentless sell-off in risk assets such as world equities and Bitcoin, deepening driven by higher interest rates and the impact on economic growth worries. At the same time, dollar held near 20-year highs. Amid bad weather, over 80,000 pilgrims visited Kedarnath Dham on the 5th day of opening. More than 80,000 pilgrims visited Kedarnath Dham and took the darshan of Lord Kedarnath. SP Rudraprayag Ayush Agarwal said that the journey to Kedarnath Dham is going on smoothly and there is a queue among the passengers for darshan. From the helipad located in Kedarnath Dham to temple, there is a long queue of devotees to have darshan of God. 6 devotees who came on Kedarnath pilgrimage have also died due to deteriorating health. In view of the bad weather, the passengers are stopped at Sonprayag and they are being sent from Sonprayag to Kedarnath Dham after the weather turns clear. Slain Indian photojournalist and 3 others get Pulitzer Prize 2022. Slain photojournalist Danish Siddiqui and 3 of his colleagues from Reuters, Adnan Abidi, Sanai Shad Mattu and Amit Dave were awarded the 2022 Pulitzer Prize in the feature photography category for their work on documenting India's battle against the second wave of COVID-19 pandemic. Siddiqui, who also won the Pulitzer Prize in 2018 for feature photography for documenting the Rohingya refugee crisis, was killed last year while covering the war between Afghan troops and the Taliban in Kandahar city. His work on capturing images of funeral pyres of COVID-19 victims at the mass cremation sites in Delhi last year had garnered widespread applause. Apart from this, he had extensively covered conflicts across the world. Apart from them, the Washington Post and New York Times won the prize for public service journalism and international reporting, respectively. India, a 365 days destination. Take a look. The Ministry of Tourism, under its Incredible India brand line, is participating in the Arabian Travel Market Dubai 2022, being held from May 9th to 12th. At the Mart, the India Pavilion is showcasing India as a 365 days destination, a year-round multifaceted tourist destination. Tourists from India and abroad can experience different cultures, adventures, cruises, luxury wildlife, wellness, medical tourism and more. The Mart is also showcasing India's rich and diversified tourism potential while also providing
The bell is going on for the Queensland Parliament and will soon be joining into that.
Some stakeholders, a platform to showcase various tourism destinations and products. It is
Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Honourable members, I respectfully acknowledge that we are sitting today on the land of Aboriginal people, and I pay respects to their elders past and present. I thank them as First Australians for their careful custodianship of the land over. Are there any matters of privilege? Honourable members, yesterday afternoon I received advice from the member for Burleigh, Michael Hart MP, as to his absence from sittings of the House yesterday and today. The member's notification complies with Standing Order 263A. Honourable members, yesterday in the second reading debate on the Public Trustee Advisory and Monitoring Board Amendment Bill, the member for Mansfield rose on a point of order indicating she took personal offence in relation to an interjection by the member for Clayfield. The Deputy Speaker of the Chair indicated that she did not hear the interjection and advised that we would consult. She would consult with me in terms of viewing and checking the audio tape of proceedings. I've listened to the recordings. There is nothing on the tapes that would indicate the member for Clayfield either identified the member for Mansfield nor that he made any personal reference to her. Accordingly, there's no point of order that can be ruled upon. Honourable members, after the conclusion of question time, I invite all members to the Lucinda Bar for Australia's biggest morning tea. It's one of course, the most important fundraising events for the Cancer Council. This May, right across Australia, all of us are trying to have a cuppa and a bite to eat to raise awareness and funds for cancer research. And that, of course, goes to prevention and support services. I encourage all members to support today's event. We will be joined by Her Excellency, the Governor of Queensland, and the Premier, and multiple members. So I encourage everyone to attend. But very importantly, I hope that you can go back to your electorates and support Australia's biggest morning tea at particular times. I advise that members, the Lucinda Bar shall be open to all persons, not just members, during this time, which is out of step with our usual arrangements. But given that we have other matters on this morning, I thought members should be aware of that. Today is ME, CFS and Fibromyalgia Awareness Day. Obviously, when people talk about things such as chronic fatigue syndrome, it's a debilitating disease. It's characterised by widespread pain, cognitive impairment and disabling fatigue. More than 75% of ME patients can't work or attend school. 25% are housebound and bedridden for years. Less than 10% ever fully recover. Sufferers so devastatingly sick through this that it is an invisible arrangement for them, and of course effectively they're lost to our community. Currently there is no cure and no approved treatment for ME, but researchers from Griffith University working with Queensland Health have developed the first laboratory-based diagnostic test. To mark today, Parliament House will be lit blue. Blue ribbons have also been distributed to members throughout the chamber. I commend the awareness day to the House and ask that people always think twice when you look at things that potentially are invisible in our community, but people quite often will be suffering from arrangements that none of us are aware of, and it's very important that we actually remember that. Honourable members, it's very rarely as Speaker that I have to record an apology, but today I wish to place on the record my apologies to the Sergeant-at-Arms. Michael obviously comes in every day leading me to the chamber and announcing me, but I gave him a very, very difficult morning. So he's had a few heart palpitations early this morning. Unfortunately, he was unknowingly a guinea pig for testing the realism of our new replica mace. As members are aware, we have school tours. Of course, we do a range of different things around Queensland, and ordinarily we would use a wooden or brass version of that mace. With improvements in 3D technology and in a role that I have as a screen champion as well, I have a lot of contacts in the movie industry. So we have produced a much, much higher quality replica. And so as part of that engagement with the industry, I reached out to Duncan Jones from Myriad Studios, and we now have a 3D replica mace which looks extraordinarily like the actual mace. So, of course, just for members' awareness, the Sergeant-at-Arms went to the cabinet to unlock the cabinet, and the cabinet had a very, very light mace, which does not weigh the usual 8 kilograms. And there was a moment he looked around and thought, there's been a heist. so Michael, I apologise, but it was worth it just to see the reaction. And very importantly, of course, we will be displaying that mace today in the cabinet for members who wish to view it. So I hope that you can. Yes, and the video may well be posted. Or wait, I can't confirm that, Clark. That's another thing. Members, also, we wish to acknowledge, of course, we're going to be visited by students and teachers from Merringaton State School in the electorate of Condamine and McGregor State High School in the electorate of Toohey. Members, of course, we are also going to be doing a condolence motion this morning. I call the Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, one, that this House desires to place on record its appreciation of the services rendered to this state by the late Honourable Keith Ernest de Lacy AM, a former member of the Parliament of Queensland and Minister of the State. Two, that Mr. Speaker be requested to convey to the family of the deceased gentleman the above resolution, together with an expression of the sympathy and sorrow of the members of the Parliament of Queensland in the loss they have sustained. Mr. Speaker, Keith de Lacy was born in Cairns on the 7th of August 1940 and was educated at Dimboola Primary School and Townsville Grammar School. He attained a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Queensland and a Diploma of Agriculture from the Queensland Agricultural College in Gatton. Mr. de Lacy had a wide variety of occupations, including tobacco farmer, tin miner, college principal, news agency proprietor, and as an agricultural education consultant for an international aid agency. In 1970, he joined the Cairns branch of the Australian Labor Party. At the state election of 1977 and 1980, he ran unsuccessfully for Barron River against the National Party's Martin Tenney. In 1983, the Labor member for Cairns, Ray Jones, retired, and Mr. de Lacy won the seat in the October election. He served as the member for Cairns for almost 15 years until June 1998, winning further elections in 1986, 1989, 1992 and 1995. After 6 years in opposition during the 80s, including front bench roles in primary industries, finance and regional development, Mr. de Lacy was part of the historic Goss government victory in 1989. He was sworn in as Treasurer and Minister for Regional Development in the first ALP government in this state in 32 years. And on this occasion, the Treasurer who, on the 5th of September 1990, delivered the first budget in Queensland in 34 years. Recognising its significance, Mr. de Lacy said it was a budget which was principally about reform, responsibility and economic growth. I quote, "This budget commences the task of introducing the most comprehensive and detailed policy reforms ever put forward by a political party in this state. It delivers those reforms while at the same time strengthening the financial position of this state." End of quote. On the eve of the 1990 budget, the Australian Financial Review interviewed Mr. de Lacy, and wrote that the state's economy is in better shape than the national economy. A familiar story which echoes down the years. At that time, in the 10 months to April 1990, the state's exports were worth $8.8 billion, a 23% increase on the previous year. Good news then, and nowadays 10 times much more, which I'm sure Mr. de Lacy would appreciate. He delivered another 5 state budgets as Treasurer until February 1996, and then there was a change of government. He retired at the state election of June 1998. Mr. de Lacy then had a very successful business career as a director and chairman of various companies in the private sector. He was president of the Queensland Division of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, and he had key roles in Ergon Energy and the Queensland Investment Corporation, serving at times as chair and as director of each. In 2001, he was awarded the Centenary Medal for his distinguished service to business and to the Parliament. In 2006, he was made a member of the Order of Australia for service to the Queensland Parliament, to business and public administration, and to the community of Cairns, of which he loved. Mr. Speaker, Mr. de Lacy had a varied career and life, from tobacco farmer to state treasurer, from miner to company director. And as I said to the House when he passed away late last year, he was a big champion for Cairns and the far north of our state. His family should be incredibly proud. Yeah. I acknowledge here today his daughter Joni, son-in-law Brett Hayward, grandson Sam, his brother Ian and nephew Michael. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Keith Ernest de Lacy AM passed away on the 26th of November 2021, aged 81. I place on record the Government's thanks for the years of service Mr. de Lacy gave to the Queensland community, and I take this opportunity to extend my sympathy and that of the House to the de Lacy family and friends.
Yeah. I call the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, our state has lost one of the genuine champions of the Queensland Parliament with the passing of Keith de Lacy. As the member for Cairns from 1983 until his retirement in 1998, he worked tirelessly for his community and for the people of far north Queensland. As Treasurer from 89 until 96, he exercised firm control over the state's finances and recognised the need for government to promote investment to help generate economic growth. Keith de Lacy's contribution as a minister and as a parliamentarian was grounded in his diverse background and experience. There are very few members of this place who could lay claim to a background which includes work as a tobacco farmer, a miner, an agricultural officer and an agricultural college principal in PNG, and a newsagent. With this background, it is little wonder that Keith de Lacy was able to transfer his myriad of skills to the political arena. Keith de Lacy's journey to this place was one of tenacity. He suffered two extremely narrow defeats in Barron River before his success in Cairns upon the retirement of the long-serving member Ray Jones in 1983. In his autobiography titled A Philosophical Journey, published shortly before his death, Mr. de Lacy wrote of the challenges of campaigning, and I quote, "I never felt comfortable door-knocking. I felt like a fraud, like a religious evangelist who didn't believe in God. However, I did come away with a renewed respect for Jehovah's Witnesses and their door-knocking commitment to their cause. But of course, they had the reward of eternal life, while I, at best, a temporary seat in the rather less ethereal Parliament of Queensland." End quote. Keith de Lacy entered the Parliament at a time when Labor was in the doldrums. However, upon the election of the Goss government in 1989, Keith de Lacy rose to prominence as Treasurer and established a reputation as an effective manager of the state's finances. Indeed, two of the most respected figures in the business and financial spheres in Queensland, Sir Leo Halsher and Jim Kennedy, rated Keith de Lacy as an exceptional treasurer. The key to his success is outlined in his autobiography when he wrote, and I quote, "I believe that you deliver on your social policy commitments through efficient spending and efficient delivery of programs, well-ordered priorities, a strong economy which increases revenue and a strong balance sheet, as opposed to splurging today and paying tomorrow, increasing taxes which weakens the economy and seeking to please the undeserving entitlement seekers lining up outside the door." End quote. After the Goss government lost in 1996, Keith de Lacy decided not to seek re-election and to pursue a new career in business. In his post-political life, Mr de Lacy played a leading role in the business community. Indeed, he demonstrated that former politicians could make a valuable contribution to the life of the state once they leave this place. His political achievements were many, but his contribution after politics was significantly equal in its magnitude. He became chairman of MacArthur Coal, of Ergon, Queensland Sugar, Cubby Group, Trinity Property Group, CEC Group, Hines Lawyers, Nimrod Resources, China Oil and Foodstuffs, and Integrated Food and Energy Development. He continued to serve the people of Cairns through his chairmanship of the Reef Casino Trust and as the founding chairman of Advance Cairns. He was president of the AICD and became a member of the Order of Australia in 2006. Mr de Lacy supported Queensland's then Attorney-General, the present Deputy Leader of the Opposition, in his efforts to reform Queensland's Directors' Liabilities Law and restore the presumption of innocence. How a member of this House is regarded is best judged not by what his or her allies say, but what their opponents say about them. Those who would normally have been numbered against Mr de Lacy held him in the highest of regards, a clear testimony to his ability to cut across the political divide. Former Premier Rob Borbidge said, and I quote, "He was a giant of the Goss-era Labor Party. He made a substantial contribution to public affairs in this state. I remember him as a passionate, deep thinker. He never hid his views, a rarity in politics." His FNQ parliamentary colleague Warren Ench, the member for Leichhardt, said, and I quote, "We weren't on the same side of politics, but I always found Keith to be honest, affable, sincere, and a man of the utmost integrity." Keith de Lacy has left a legacy of which his family, who are here today, can be justifiably proud. From humble beginnings, he has left a significant mark on the Queensland political, economic and social landscape. On behalf of the opposition, I acknowledge Mr de Lacy's contribution to Queensland and we extend our deepest condolences to his family.
I call the Treasurer.
Speaker, it is a singular honour to serve as a Queensland Labor Treasurer in a Queensland Labor government. The great modernising progressive reforms, reforms that transform Queensland for the better, reforms that are only ever introduced and implemented by Labor governments. Those reforms are only made possible through the sound economic stewardship of those Labor governments. One of the best examples of this was the Goss Labor government, including the man who was its Treasurer for every single day of that government, Keith de Lacy. After more than 3 decades of Conservative rule, the Goss government came to office facing significant challenges, but it also grasped the historic opportunity presented by that magnificent win in 1989 to change Queensland for the better, to make significant infrastructure investments in schools and public housing, to employ thousands of additional teachers, to build and rebuild public hospitals, to protect our unique and precious natural environment. To do all of this and more, the Goss government had to assure Queenslanders it had the fiscal discipline necessary to deliver such an ambitious program. And to a significant extent, that task fell to Keith de Lacy. The task was monumental. Reform the electoral system, modernise the public service, transform policing and fundamentally improve the delivery of health, education and social and community services. Services for so long ignored, neglected and denied to Queenslanders, while at the same time instituting fundamental human rights reforms. All this had to be done while assuring Queenslanders that the Labor government had a firm hand on the financial tiller. A Queensland public who for years had been fed the myth by the Liberal and National parties that those on the right of politics were somehow more entitled or better able to manage public finances. Keith de Lacy was able to do so much more than just steer the financial and fiscal ship. With his Premier, he set about an ambitious program to bring more major companies and more major events to Queensland. The validation of that strategy is that it is mirrored in so much of what our government, our Labor government, does today. And Keith de Lacy was not afraid of confronting difficult decisions. It takes strength and determination for a former tobacco farmer to advocate an increase in the tobacco levy to fund a signature Goss government initiative, a 10-year hospital redevelopment program. As a proud regional Queenslander who had worked in some of our state's traditional industries like agriculture and mining, Keith de Lacy understood the importance of regional development, of having tailor-made plans to support job creation and economic growth in a way that suited the different conditions in each of our regions. And after the Goss government, Keith continued to show his passion for those great strengths of the Queensland economy, serving on the boards of a number of significant Queensland companies, especially in the agriculture and resources sector. Along with the Premier, the Leader of the Opposition and all members of this House, I express my condolences to the family of the late Keith de Lacy. Today we remember and recognise Keith de Lacy's significant contribution to Queensland. Bale, Keith de Lacy.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that's about all with the Queensland Parliament live coverage for this morning. And this morning has been a tribute to Keith Lacey, for late Keith Lacey, and what a great man he was. So, hence, a bipartisan support in his tribute. Well, right now it's time to say goodbye from this segment. We'll be back at 10 with that exclusive interview with Brice Raga. We'll see you then.